We give you all the kingdom, honor, and the glory, because you said it, we believe it, and that settles it. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Again, thank you so much for being here today for our work session. We turn it over now to Mr. Sims.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. Tonight we have the consultants, Iparametrics, here today to provide us an update. We have Ms. Kennedy Shannon and as well as Ms. Michelle Adela. Please come on up.
Iparametrics Consulting firm, and I'm also the attorney for federal grant compliance for Iparametrics. So my job is kind of all things ARPA. I handle the whole ARPA line of business, and I'm super excited to get the opportunity to do all in person to answer your questions. And joining me is my colleague Michelle. I'll allow her to introduce herself.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us. My name is Michelle Fidelia. I am project manager here at Iparametrics. I'm here for all things federal compliance.
Thanks so much. Hey, can you pull your mic just a little bit closer?
Absolutely. Better?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so in some of the last meetings, there were a lot of discussion about once we got the consultants on board, we wanted to bring them before you all to kind of answer questions, talk about parameters, talk about how we're going to move forward with the ARPA funding. And they're here tonight to kind of talk about those things, as well as to get feedback from you all to move forward with different tasks.
You want to kick it off, or?
Sure. So as stated, we're here to answer any questions that you guys may have. If there's anything you need us to explain, we're here to explain it. We've got a little information just about where you guys are as a community and your ARPA allocation, and about what it is that you want to do going forward. And so we're kind of here to help. So I'll just start it with any questions that you guys may have.
So you guys are going to put together the criteria for the guidelines and things like that.
So for each program. So let's talk about that. So it looks like you guys had an application process, if you will, for nonprofits and small businesses, but there really was no criteria put on that application, and so you kind of got a wide variety of different applications. What's going to have to happen is, as a community, you guys are going to have to determine what your eligibility criteria will be. What do you want to fund? And then what are the limits? Because my understanding is you got applications that range from $1,000 to $500,000, and so you guys have to put a limit on the number of small businesses you want to service, what the maximum might be for those grants. An example would be, I've got a client that is giving away $2,500 small business grants. I got another client that's doing $50,000. So it just depends on how much money you put in that bucket. Question to you all, have you determined how much of your total ARPA allocation you want to put for small business assistance or nonprofit assistance?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we have a list, but we wanted to make sure that this list was approved by the board as far as the total dollar amount for categories, and we just wanted to kind of get feedback from you all tonight about that. Also, we talked with the consultants about the rollout. If we wanted to fund more for small businesses, then that would be the will of the commission. If we wanted more for the nonprofits, that would be the will of the commission. We also talked about there's an opportunity for revenue recovery, and they might want to talk about that as well, whereas a lot of communities are utilizing their ARPA funding to address internal needs, as I mentioned in previous meetings. And it's not uncommon for some to kind of balance both the county or the government entity as well as the community entity. They shared with us, they've seen where some communities have done 50% for the government entity and then 50% for the community. And we kind of thought that would be a great idea to make sure both entities are being served.
Absolutely. So, part of this money is revenue recovery. This is revenue that you would have received had it not been for COVID, right? So the government understands that you guys have needs as a community that are internal infrastructure needs that have to be taken care of, as well as outside community needs. And so your funding kind of splits evenly to where you could give $10 million to the community, a little over $10 million, I think, and then keep $10 million in-house for a lot of things that you guys need for infrastructure purposes, right? And everybody gets a piece of ARPA funding if you do it that way. You give it all to the community if you so decide to do that, but again, that means as a community, you guys are then giving up an opportunity to make some drastic, much-needed improvements in-house that you probably have been waiting to do. It's my understanding, I think, in your last budget that you guys budgeted 0 for capital projects because you were anticipating getting ARPA funding. Well, unless you put ARPA funding in that category, that means you have 0 funding in your current budget for any capital projects, which I'm sure you guys need. So, just something to consider, but it ultimately is your decision. As far as revenue recovery, I always recommend to my clients, take as much revenue recovery as you can. The reason why, there are think about that as kind of 2 buckets. One being ARPA proper, which is what the final rule dictates. The final rule dictates how you spend that money, who's eligible for it. With revenue recovery, that's money the federal government's giving back to you essentially. So you decide where that money goes. As long as it fits the definition as a service that's with the general services of the government. So I'm not saying go out and buy Lamborghinis for the police department, but if you guys wanted to pay police officers, wanted to pay firefighters, wanted to build a community center, these are all things that you would be able to do with your revenue recovery, which is a lot easier to do with ARPA proper, because ARPA proper again is very detailed and prescriptive in what you have to do in order to meet the final rule. So you guys have an opportunity to take $10 million as revenue recovery just off the bat. I recommend that you do that because it'll make your lives a lot easier. It'll make decisions on where to put that money a lot easier, and it'll make reporting back to the federal government and the compliance requirements a lot easier.
Can you talk about, before we start taking questions, can you talk a little bit about reporting back to the federal government?
Yes, so reporting back to the federal government, with revenue recovery, it's really simple, right? You're really telling the government, we spent X amount of dollars on this activity, and they literally only have a space on the report for like 2 lines, right? We paid the fire department, or we paid staff for the police. Again, as long as there's something that's not in there that shouldn't be there for government spending, something that's out of the ordinary, Treasury doesn't really care because this is your money. This is revenue recovery. ARPA proper is going to be looked at a little different. You've got to meet all the requirements that are in the final rule when you put an expenditure under ARPA proper in one of those funding categories. So an example would be small business assistance. If you do ARPA proper, you can't just give a grant to a small business. It's got to be reasonable and proportionate to their loss. So say for instance I'm a small business and I say I had $100,000 in loss. You have to demonstrate that. You have to show me what those losses are. I can't just take your word for it. So the final rule says that you can demonstrate that by showing a loss of gross or net revenue. We look at that by looking at your federal tax return, right? We look at your Schedule C, something that's an official government document that you filed, that you know if you did it wrong or you did it fraudulently, you're going to jail. So that gives us a little bit more onus than you writing a letter saying, I'm suffering financial hardship, right? You have to be able to demonstrate that. Legal documentation. And then it has to be proportionate. So if your reduction of revenue is only $30,000 and you're asking for $50,000, I can only give you $30,000 because that's what you can demonstrate. So those are the rules and the requirements and the prescriptive measures under ARPA proper that I'm talking about. Now for revenue recovery, it's different. You can do another grant program for small businesses and kind of have more open parameters. But most small business should be focused in that ARPA proper spending pot because all of ARPA funding needs to tie back to the impact of COVID-19. Let me make that clear. Because a lot of communities don't understand that. They just think it's free money. You have to tie it back to COVID-19 and the impact of COVID-19, either on the nonprofit, whether it's on the individual being assisted, whether it's rental assistance, or whether it's on the small business being assisted. So that has to be first and foremost built into your program requirements and built into your application process. So me, as an auditor coming in, I'm going to ask you, how does this tie back to COVID? And if it doesn't, I'm going to ask for that money back out of your general fund.
All right, Commissioner Sanders.
Thank you so much for coming today. I'm sorry, Shannon? Okay, that's all right. Have you looked at the ARPA update, because they lessened the actual ruling on some of it? So ARPA now states that even though certain things may have happened with COVID, if you had an issue before COVID and it goes through COVID, you still are eligible for those funds.
So the date is March 3rd, 2021. So anything from March 3rd, 2021 forward, we can address. But even then, you still have to explain how it's COVID related, right? So an example would be small business assistance, right? A business has to show how they were negatively impacted by COVID. Well, if you're a new business that started 2 months ago, you weren't negatively impacted by COVID. You started during COVID. So for a lot of business assistance, you need to have been in existence prior to COVID in order to show that you had an effect by COVID, as an example. Same with a nonprofit, right? A nonprofit can demonstrate that they were affected by COVID, which is definitely the case because a lot of nonprofits lost funding. They didn't get the donations that they usually get because people were struggling financially and so they couldn't donate. And as a result of that, nonprofit income was reduced. The nonprofit can show you that. Say, hey, look, any other given year we raise $250,000 a year. This year we raised $50,000 and it's because of COVID. That's a $200,000 need that you guys can potentially fund with COVID. So to answer your question, you are correct. There have been a couple of changes, but as it stands now, March 3rd, 2021 forward is the dates that you have to look at as it relates to the final rule.
The other thing I mentioned, I know you stated about the 10 million revenue loss. I agree with you to that point, but the only thing that I'm worried about, because we are an area that's in need. And we kind of seen that when we did our homeowners rental and mortgage assistance of how many people need those funds, and we had over 700 applications in 1 week. And so providing that 10 million, that whole 10 million that's just coming in, and having that just for expenses for internal is not. I know they just recently allowed that to happen because at first you had to do the application and the workshop to see if you actually qualified to be able to have that revenue loss, and they actually lessened that now. But the issue with that is that we have so many needs in our community, not saying that the county does not have needs as well, that we only have 21 million. We probably have 14 million left. We already allocated the first 10 million to various categories. So we have a whole 10 million that we're just going to count as a loss and not giving back to the community. That is I would say, not a public servant good way to do it. So that's one of my concerns as a public servant, is just that we are not giving enough to the community. And when you mention about the stipulations or guidelines, the amount that we want to give to those nonprofits and small businesses, I actually sent that to the board as well, how we can break that down. And also our committee kind of talked about it as well. It can be done, but more money needs to go into the pot. I guess, and I think Commissioner Edwards kind of spoke about that, giving more money to the small businesses and nonprofits. But giving a whole 10 million just for internal expenses and not thinking about the community, and we're looking at all of the other counties who are giving back to the community. Yes, some of them did utilize the 10 million. A lot of your rural areas utilize that whole amount because that's all they have. And they have the things that we have, the community that's in need and so forth. So they use that loss just for that. That's all they had. They didn't have the homelessness and things that we see here in the community. So just basically stating, I know you want to hear some of the things from my concerns, is a whole 10 million going towards revenue loss. It's not a service, it's a disservice to our community.
Well, to answer your question, I can agree with that to an extent. I think that, say for instance, you needed road repair or you needed something to be ADA compliant, I think that your constituents would benefit from that, right? It trickles down to the community. If you needed to update your traffic lighting downtown, like everybody would benefit from that. So when I say revenue recovery, I don't necessarily mean it as you just paying your internal bills. I mean doing capital projects that have an impact in your community that people can see. There may be a park you want to redo downtown that's been old and dilapidated. There may be a plethora of different activities that you want to do. There might be buildings that you want to update. And you can do that with revenue recovery, and every citizen would benefit from those updates. And so it's not just you internally just paying bills and, paying salaries and things like that you can't see. I'm with you. They should be tangible products, right? They should be tangible projects that the community can look and say, that's where our ARPA funding went, right? We got a new community center because of that ARPA funding. Or we got the old gymnasium updated, and now it has air conditioning and people can use it. So examples like that.
I don't know if you're aware of, I don't know if Jarvis gave it to you, they did a poll, a survey with the county, and the constituents actually stated where they would like to see these funds actually spent in the community. So I don't know if Jarvis can get a hold of that and give that to her. It was actually done through, I want to say, what was the newspaper? Newton Citizen did it, and his constituents actually voted to see where they wanted these funds to go.
Do you know what a few of the main categories were?
One was homeowners rental assistance, health and community, small businesses, and nonprofit. Those were your top 4 and 5.
Gotcha.
Those are the top.
And those are pretty popular programs just across the country. So overall, we represent like 30 ARPA clients, over $1 billion in ARPA funding. So we've got programs that run the whole gamut. But those, the ones you just mentioned, are pretty top priority. We're seeing a lot of programs now for child care, because that's a need in the community. A lot of communities are suffering with child care. Either lack of employees who work in child care, they're not making enough money, or lack of child care centers or facilities. So that's another issue.
Yes.
So you guys, and I don't envy you at all, you have the task of identifying where these resources should go in your community and where they're best served, right? So once you do that, then we come in and say, look, you've allocated $1 million in ARPA for small business. Let us put some parameters around that, right? What do we define as a small business? Is that a business with 100 employees or less? 200 employees or less? Do we want to focus on only businesses that are in qualified census tracts? Do we want to focus on businesses that have a particular amount of revenue? Do we want to exclude franchises, right? McDonald's should be able to get some of this money. We want the small mom and pops in the community to get this money. So those are the parameters that we then have to put on this program, and then we'll help you create that. And then we'll make sure that you get all the documentation you need to remain compliant. Because I can make one promise to you. When the auditors come, they're going to find a way to take this money back from you all. That's their job, right? So my job is to make sure that that doesn't happen. That you guys have all the documentation you need, that your contracts are in place, there's monitoring taking place to make sure that these organizations are spending the money the way that they said they would, so that you guys don't become on the hook for that money back to the federal government.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's kind of what I want to talk about, the application process, having parameters in place to ensure that we are compliant as far as the county. And then I just wanted to kind of respond to Commissioner Sanders' comment about the $10 million. We recognize and understand the needs of the community, but we also recognize that there are a lot of needs in our county that we need to address. And as you all indicated, some of the needs that we had identified, they would take a more holistic approach and benefit the community if we would address some of our parks, if we would address some of the needs within the sheriff's office or the fire or public works. So we think that those needs would benefit the entire county. But if you all would kind of talk more about the grant application and what's involved with that once we do decide on getting awards out.
So our job is to craft an application. Well, you almost have already had an application process, right? We already know what these proposals are. But once you put parameters on it, it's going to eliminate some of those ones that you got, right? Either they've asked for too much, or you either go back to them and say, look, this is what the max is now, we want to reconsider. But then we have to look and make sure that that's an ARPA allowable expense, right? Because just because a business says, I want to expand, that's not really necessarily a COVID hardship, right? There are small businesses that are struggling to stay open and you want to expand, you know? So looking at the ones that are about to close their doors, right? The ones that need it most. But then we draft a grant agreement, and this is an agreement between the small business and the county that says, look, what I'm telling you is true and accurate, and if it's not, I'm going to jail. Because as we've seen with PPP loans, loans have been very tricky, and the federal government just extended the time frame that they have to prosecute to 10 years because it was rampant. And so we want to make sure that we're checking and verifying information. We want to make sure that businesses are providing us with tax returns if they're saying that they lost money in a tax year. If they're claiming financial hardship, we want to see a bank statement with what you got in your bank account versus what your bills are for the next 6 months. If you got $100,000 in your bank account, $30,000 worth of bills, where's the financial hardship? Whatever you're telling us, you should be able to document effectively, right? Again, you have to take the documents at face value, unless they look like they've been photoshopped. Okay, now then you've got a right to ask. But as long as you're doing your due diligence and people are providing the documentation and they're signing this agreement, then you're covered. Because in the event that it comes back that this stuff is fraudulent, that agreement then gives you the teeth to go after them, to be prosecuted, as well as to go after them financially to get that money back. But that's just an example of the agreement. Now, the agreement for the nonprofit is going to look a lot different than the agreement for the small business, and vice versa. It just depends on the programming that we put into place. If you did a grant for a stipend for child care employees, right? We're doing a grant for Fayetteville, North Carolina, where their issue is hiring new staff in the child care centers. So they're doing a hiring bonus of $2,000 for all new employees. And it's split up every month to make sure that nobody just go and say, I'm going to work there, get the $2,000 and say, peace, I'll see you next week. It's spread out to make sure that the employee actually stays there. And then there's also a bonus for those employees that have stayed during COVID, right? Because we know a lot of employees, make $10 an hour. They're not doing it for the money. They do it for the love of the children. And to be able to benefit them and give them an appreciation stipend to say, I appreciate you for sticking with us when it was tough, when everybody else left. That goes a long way, especially in an infrastructure of childcare that's crumbling and losing employees every day. So that's just an example. That agreement would look a lot different than the small business agreement. But it would be our job to make sure that everything is in there to protect you all.
Commissioner Calvin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few months ago, this board approved $1 million per district. Some of the projects have been laid out for us and everything, some requests and everything. Do you see any problem with any of that arrangement?
So the fact that you all got $1 million for each of your district is fair, right? So it's fair. So it wasn't necessarily impartial. I mean, everybody got the same amount for the district. You could have done it that way. It's your choice how you do it. What my job would be is to look at each of your projects that you want to fund and tell you how that project can be compliant. It's not my job to tell you how to spend your money. My job is to tell you how to spend it right and get it out into the community quickly. And I will let you know if there is something on your list that's not ARPA eligible, how do we make it ARPA eligible, right? How do we tweak it? How do we tweak the program to where it meets the requirements? But as it stands, each commissioner getting $1 million, I don't necessarily see a problem with that, as there's nothing against ARPA against doing it that way, because it was evenly distributed amongst each of the districts. It's just making sure that money is then spent according to ARPA requirements, depending on what category you put it into. But if that's what you guys voted to do with your money, then that decision ultimately lies with you.
Yeah. Stuff like capital improvements and buildings and renovations and things like that, those are okay.
Yes.
They're public use.
Yeah, as long as it's a public building, right? We're not
But you
renovating
still want to
somebody's house. Yeah, as long as it's, yep, absolutely. And like I said, we would go through each of the lists, each of the projects. If we had questions, we would reach out to that commissioner and say, hey, can you give us some information about this particular program or this particular person you wanted to fund? What are they going to do with the money? And again, we'll let you know if there are any issues, if you need to tweak it. But again, you guys have been sitting on this money for a while. Okay, you got to get this money spent. It has to be allocated by 2024 and spent by 2026. And to be honest, you guys are kind of behind the 8 ball with a lot of other communities. So getting our house in order, because it's our house now, because I'm living in here with you now, our house in order and identifying where we want to spend it is what we're here to help with.
Go ahead, sir.
Well, part of the reason we delayed on this, none of us wanted to go to jail. So that's why we hired you.
I completely agree. I don't look good in orange, and I'm not going to jail for somebody else's money not happening. So we're here. Absolutely. You got a question?
Yeah, I just wanted them to talk about some businesses that recently started. And you mentioned about that, but we just want you all to kind of really dive in that if we have businesses that, just started with the hopes or thoughts of receiving ARPA funding, that would be allowable.
Yeah, so again, you want to tie it back to the impact of COVID, right? And as a new business, you've really not been impacted by COVID because you kind of went into it knowing what you were getting yourself into because you started a business during COVID. So that was kind of a business decision that you took. But if that's not the case, right, we want to make sure that you were in existence prior to COVID, right? That's my recommendation for any small business assistance program. And you want to focus on the businesses that are up and running now, right, that are servicing your community. Not to discount those that want to start a business, and I don't want to come across it like discounting those, but we want to keep the businesses that are open and operating in our community now, that are hiring people, that are providing the service, and prevent them from closing their doors. So that would be my recommendation to you all, and that's a best practice using ARPA funding.
And I just wanted to add, as far as you all stated, we're behind. Some of the other communities utilize revenue recovery, and that's why they are ahead on following their projects.
Yes. A lot of the projects, because a lot of these communities already had shovel-ready projects waiting to go, they just never had the money to fund it. So as soon as they got an opportunity to fund it, they're like, get them started, because again, the money has to be spent by 2026. Some of these capital projects may take years to build out, or depending on what project you fund. And so, I know you have some internal city projects that are sitting there waiting to be allocated funding that can start tomorrow probably. So maybe looking at that. And, do you put the whole 10 million? That would be my recommendation. Do you do less than that? That's fine too. But put something internally to fix your infrastructure. That would be my recommendation. If you took anything else away from this meeting, it would be, I think that's a fair exchange, right? The community gets 10, internal gets 10. The community is benefiting from the full 20, to be honest. So.
Thank you. I have Commissioner Mason, Commissioner Henderson, and Commissioner Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for taking on this partnership to kind of ensure that we are doing this the right way and that we're moving in the right direction. I kind of want to hear also too from, we actually formed a subcommittee. There were two commissioners, county attorney and a county manager, that basically would come together and meet and have conversations and discussions about some things that we wanted to, from a qualification perspective. I know at one of the most recent meetings, or the last meeting, if I can recall correctly, they begin to talk about what is the minimum, what is the maximum amount that we want to give. So I would really love to hear from them to say, did they come to that agreement? If so, how does that look? Also, we did talk about, back on July the 14th, our subcommittee actually did send us an updated form in regards to kind of what they were talking about, what they were thinking. And I know we had allocated at least, and I know one of my colleagues talked about, there was a survey that was done. And I think our subcommittee, what they did was, they looked at that survey and said, hey, well, let's allocate some of these funds to some of those areas that the residents stated that they would like to see. I know we allocated funds towards COVID-19. We had an incentive program. We had vaccination kits. We had mental health and substance abuse. We did allocate funds towards rental and homeowners assistance. We did also set aside $400,000 for small business recovery and restart program. So we did allocate some funds already for small businesses and 501c3s. Then each out of $1 million that some of us, that we did receive, we also allocated some additional funds to small businesses and 501c3s. So it's really going to be more than $400,000 when you really look at what we have allocated in addition to the 400,000 that we allocated as a whole. And this was all from the very first part that we got.
Gotcha.
Not our second draw, the first draw.
Gotcha.
We allocated these funds. So we have done some work. And of course, our subcommittee has brought that back to us. We agreed on moving forward to that. So I would really love for you all to have that data, that information as well, what we've already done, what we've already allocated funds, and hopefully that will help you kind of determine where we are, what we're looking at and what we want to do, and then that will help kind of start setting those parameters in place and say, what are the qualifications? You know, is it, do they have to have 200 employees?
Right.
Do they have to have 5 employees? Do they have to have any employees at all? So looking at those type of things, I think will kind of help us to ensure that we're moving in the right direction as well. So I did want to let you know that we have done some work.
Absolutely, and to comment on that, the fact that you guys have your own allocation, I assume your allocations are for your district, right? So depending on, you may have allocated 300,000 in your doing for your small businesses, and they may have allocated 100,000, you know, so there's a mismatch there, right? So do you combine all the funding and put it into one pot for small businesses with the understanding that it would be for the entire county? Do you have separate pots? Because have separate pots, you know, the assistance would only depend on if your commissioner decided to fund that activity, which I don't think would be fair to some of the other districts, right? So that's a discussion you guys would have to have, because having it that way kind of makes it uneven, and just depending on where you live, you may only be eligible for 100,000 small business assistance, but if I live right across the road, I'm eligible for up to 400,000. You know, there's a bigger pot. So that's a discussion you guys need to have, and I would recommend kind of rolling all of those amounts up into a program, including whatever you're putting for the other allocation, and saying, look, for small businesses, we got $1 million total, right? For rental assistance, we got X amount of dollars total. For nonprofits, we have X amount of dollars total, and it's a county-wide application process. Because to do it by district is a lot, because you have to have separate application processes. You have to keep track of, you know, are they a District 4 or 3 resident, right? Well, we've got already awarded these many businesses, we only have this much left in this district, but we got this much left in this district, so.
More seamless.
Yes, absolutely, and then less opportunity to make mistakes in which an auditor can catch, right? Which is what I want to avoid. So just something you guys need to discuss. But you're right, having those parameters in place, we need to have that, because we can't make those decisions for you. I can make recommendations all day, but they're ultimately your decision to say, we're going to do small businesses, we're going to define a small business as being less than 100 employees, less than $100,000 in annual revenue, you know, in a qualified census tract, not in a qualified census tract, but regardless of the fact, they still have to be able to meet one of those requirements that the federal government says they have to under the final rule to get a grant anyway. So,
thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Commissioner Henderson.
Thank you, Sid. Thank you, Ms. Kennedy and Ms.
Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you so very much for coming and helping us. One of my concerns was when we first started giving out money, I think we gave $200,000 to the mental health facility off of Brown Beach Road. And then the other commission chimed in, help too as well. And then we gave another, we gave another 30,000 we did District 4 to help us over on Mill Street, which are all good projects. But when I came out with my next two projects, out of my $1 million I want to spend, and we had to wait to now to get a consultant to tell me that how we can spend this money in our district, like for food insecurities. Like we wanted to give $10,000 to churches, some in my district, some out of my district, to get with their food pantry, because when you ride downtown during the week, you see about 200-300 people over at First Baptist getting food, whereas you had kind of throughout the community, it would have more people. And we talk about that too as well. We talk about nursing hikes and the child, just like what you said earlier, said that the children, the parents couldn't afford for daycare, so we were trying to kind of fix that to a certain degree. And while we were trying to fix that and make it kind of open for all the kids,
the county stopped funding because we had to have some kind of report. It cost about $15,000, which we didn't have, and the county said, well, you know y'all don't got it, we're gonna give it to you. And we haven't got it yet, but they don't fund you while you are seeking that particular. So I guess the question is how around could all the funds be used to I guess substitute those money that you give to those nonprofits. Well, they know nonprofits because they've been donating for several years to those nonprofits. Give money to them to help them to the county figure out a way of getting a 3-year some kind of audit they want to fund those because it's my understanding it's only 3 organizations. It's Nelson Heights, Washington Street, and one out for 162, and they all in the underserved areas in the county. And so they are hurting to a certain degree. And so they really need help. And we're trying our best to get the help to them while we figure out maybe what we might want to do as far as general fund funding.
Gotcha.
So, and I believe, unless my ARPA committee is telling me something wrong, that all these projects are ready. You know, like we used to say when a road was shovel ready, these are shovel ready.
Gotcha.
And so I want to just kind of pass these on to look at it.
Absolutely. So that, just to speak to that, about the initiatives that you guys have already identified with your $1 million, that's my first priority, is to go through that list, see what's automatically approved via ARPA. Now, if I run into something that I think is kind of on the fence, I'll let you know we need to tweak this, right? Instead of them giving it to these people, they need to give it to people in a qualified census tract. Can they do that? Yes. Then you got an approved program. I'll help you draft up the grant agreement. They sign it, you get a check in their hand. So I'm with you. We need to get the money out to the communities ASAP, but we want to do so in a way that doesn't put us in jeopardy of having to pay any money back. So that's my first priority, is to look at what you guys have already promised, because these organizations have been waiting, right? You promised them, you told them it's coming, and they waiting, and they came yet. So my job is to help you get that money out the door first, while you guys figure out your other priorities that we need to figure out as far as the other funding and this other list of projects that you got for nonprofits and small business. And then exploring some other programs, like it sounds like you guys need some child care assistance, right? What could a program look like? I can give you recommendations, and you can talk amongst yourself and think, this would work for our community, this might not. But yes, to answer your question, that is my first priority, to go through those projects and green light the ones that can go, so that we can get that community, that money into the hands of those organizations as soon as possible.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And one last, I guess, comment or question, and it is, the $10 million that we may have that we can do capital improvement with, $5 million of it, in my opinion, should go to capital improvement towards the county. The other $5 million should go to the district commissioner, him or her, to allocate out in the community with your help. Make sure they community projects to spend within the community, because it's 20-30% of the people in Newton County are in poverty. And we don't even know it because we're so used to it. And we want to change that.
Absolutely. And just to piggyback on that, the final rule is very clear that those that live in qualified census tracts are deemed disproportionately impacted. So they are allowed to get more benefit of ARPA dollars than others. Some of your districts have qualified census tracts, and I assume some of your districts may not. And so what that's ultimately going to end up looking like is it's going to look like mismatch assistance. Absolutely. But it's going to look like mismatch assistance, because it's going to look like one district that has all the qualified census tracts got all the assistance. Well, that's the whole purpose of ARPA, is to help those who have been downtrodden, the ones that are having the hardest time to recover from COVID-19. So just want to make that clear, right? It's hard to make sure everybody gets the same amount of water in their bucket, because the way that the final rule is structured, some districts are going to benefit more than others. And I just want to make that very clear.
Thank you, Commissioner Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
First of all, thank you guys for coming.
No problem.
Much needed, much appreciated. Thank you so much. So, did I understand you correctly to say small businesses and nonprofits that were not in existence before 21 would not be eligible?
No, so any expenses they had before March 3rd, 2021 would not be eligible, but the business could have been in existence.
Let me try this again. How about
So an example would be one of the funding things that you could do for small business would be reimbursing businesses for costs that they paid to mitigate the spread of COVID. So say for instance I was a restaurant and I had to create an outdoor space where I didn't have one to serve because I didn't want to spread COVID in my restaurant, right? And I did that back in 2021. But if I give you an invoice from February 2021, I can't pay it. But if you give me an invoice from March 2021 forward, I can pay that with ARPA and reimburse that. So that's just an example of what that date meant. But you can be in existence prior to that.
Okay, I got you.
Okay.
Well, I think going forward, you mentioned one of your first priorities would be to look at the district allocations of the $1 million. I think I agree that's going to be very important to qualify those, and if they're not, to get them qualified.
Absolutely.
So I think working with the county manager and his team, that we're going to need you to look at what we've already allocated / paid.
Yep.
Not necessarily paid, but what we've allocated and what we have paid. And then you're going to look to us for another list at some point of the rest of the allocations, right?
Yes.
The rest of the allocation of the money. So I think I was on the little subcommittee that Commissioner Mason mentioned earlier, and I think we tried to kick it off and get some movement for the sake of the citizen, right? But we all have different things we have to do. Full-time job, you know.
Gotcha.
So I'm a part-time commissioner, so I think this is going to be much needed. But I think going forward, this is just me talking, right? We're going to need yourself and the county manager to come before us at a meeting and say, all right, would you vote on this? Here's some categories, yes or no, or tweak it, discussion and tweak it. I believe we're going to do this swiftly. We're going to have to start doing that in rapid fire at regular commissioner meetings and maybe even special call meetings for the sake of a sense of urgency.
I agree, because once you get those pots defined, you know what we're working with, then we can dig in and start building out the programs to spend that money. But until that's identified, we're kind of operating blind.
So what I guess what I'm saying is the subcommittee, we try to work with a sense of urgency, right? But I believe it's time to ramp that up. So we're going to be looking at you guys working with the county to get that done, if you don't mind.
Absolutely, appreciate it.
So it's crazy. Some expediency. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
No problem.
I think Mr. Sims.
I think they answered it when they mentioned about the first task will be looking at the commissioner's list. And we definitely recognize that we've been waiting for a while. So we had already had conversations with them about looking at the commissioner's list first. That would be our first task.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Savage.
Yes, I just have a few questions, just to expound upon what my colleague was saying about getting the information out. If you don't mind, can you make sure that it gets to us before the meeting, not the day of? Because that's kind of been our norm.
Absolutely. You tell me when you need it by.
Versus looking at a contract during the meeting and trying to vote on it.
Opportunity to review it prior to.
Yeah, so
Absolutely.
That would be great. And the application process is my concern. We already did an application process telling the citizens what they needed and what a short procedure guideline. So from you being the legal advisor, that's my concern, because a lot of the constituents, and even when we had the public meeting, that was their concern. Like, you told us this is what all we needed. So they filled out an application based on what we told them was the process and what was voted on here. So adding additional guidelines, my concern is how is that going to look and how that's going to affect us, because the application and the process is already in place.
Gotcha. So I understand that. I completely get it. We're going to try to make it as painless as possible, right? With the understanding that we're here to help them get their money, right? So my benefit, and help us help you, right?
Yeah.
So the benefit is give us the documents, help us get the documents that we need so we can get you the money as quickly as possible, right? Will there be instances in which we ask for something that they were originally asked for? Absolutely. And And I say that because when the original process was put into place, you know, I don't know, you know, I'm sure compliance was looked at, but not to the level at which we would look at it, right? So there may be some follow-up, but that's regardless, right? Even if we created the application process from the beginning, we usually have to go back to the applicant to get other additional information. But I promise you, it will only be information that is absolutely necessary in order to get that money out into the community. And it would be something that shouldn't be that burdensome to provide. It should be something that as an organization they already have on hand, and not something that they have to go out and get and wait a long time to get.
And for, just to answer, my colleague was asking about if we already had outlined how much we would give. That was actually sent in the July 13th email. So I'll forward, you probably forward that back to our county manager, because it was sent to the whole board, and I'll make sure he gets that.
Perfect, that'd be awesome. Yeah, and just like that process was, we need to do that process for all the other programs, right? If you want to do a child care program, what does that look like? And we can help you, right? If you have a meeting and you want our help, and as you're talking and say, hey, Iparametrics, is that allowable? Well, what if we do this? We can bounce ideas off of you if you want us at the meeting to help you kind of craft these programs. We'd rather be on the front end and helping you craft it as opposed to coming in on the back end when it's already done and having to change some things to prevent what you just described of giving this information to the community that then has to be kind of backtracked a bit to make sure that we get everything we need to be compliant with federal government.
Got you for that,
Two things I wanted to add to all. The initial list that was provided, I don't know if it was provided before I got here, but a lot of the categories or projects, I don't know if they are necessarily relevant at this time because it was right in the heat of COVID. So some were like incentives for people to get the vaccination. Is that relevant at this time? So what I'm asking is that do we need to look at our list again and make sure the categories are relevant now? And then also I had conversations with the consultants. We also talked about, is it necessary to have a business license if you are a small business? And there was a lot of debate about that as well amongst you all. And I would like for the consultants to talk about their experience with other counties or cities regarding that matter.
So as it relates to businesses and being able to show that you are in fact a business, we know that there are businesses that are incorporated, right? You're an LLC, but we also know that there are sole proprietors that don't have to be incorporated, right? You still have to be able to provide some type of documentation to prove that, because otherwise I could say, yes, I'm a business, right? So it could be the name of your business. It could be a bank statement with the name of your business on there, right? So even if I'm a sole proprietor, if I've got a shop called Kennedy's Cookies, I should be able to show you a bank account with Kennedy's Cookies on it. It may not be Kennedy's Cookies Incorporated or LLC, but it's still a financial document that I can show that proves I'm a business. Something to back up what you're saying, because again, we have to make sure that we document, we have proof in there that these businesses actually exist. And so the saying, if a business does not have a business license, they should have a federal tax return because everybody got to pay off the stand. So you should have a Schedule C for your business, whether you're a sole proprietor, LLC, or whatever. You should be able to show us with that business name on there, with that address, that this business exists. Absent that, then it would be a denial because you can't prove to us that you have this business. And if you truly are a business and you were there prior to COVID, there should be some footprint, some digital footprint, some website, some financial footprint to show that you actually exist. And that's what you need to make sure that you have in order to make that payment and make it knowing that you won't have to pay it back.
Commissioner Kings.
This is my last question. Maybe this one will ask.
All you want.
This evening I call you.
Oh, you called me.
I got you.
Okay.
Ask all you want.
I guess the nonprofits that we've already given money to, that they've already spent, that we've already got ready to check out to. Are you going back and check those and make sure?
Absolutely. And if there's something missing, I will go to them. Like in our meeting, I assume all of these are friendly organizations, right? So if I call them and say I need something, they'll be like, I got your money, and hang up the phone. So if there's something we're missing, we've got until 2026 to get it and close out, okay? So that's second on my list, is to go through what's already been spent, to see what may be missing, what we need to have, and get those documents so we can then put that aside and say we are confident that these have been paid according to federal rules and regulations. So absolutely, I will be reviewing those as well.
And my last question is for the ones that we're gonna turn in after several months to you, and I'm gonna turn this in and see it.
Okay.
Check on the deal with you.
Gotcha.
When will we know whether or not we might be able to give them some money to help?
So once you guys identify your funding categories, right, and you put the parameters on there, then, so from my understanding, the two responses you got were small business and nonprofit, right? Those pretty much
For the application.
for the applications, right? So say for instance, if you do a child care program, you've not done an application for that yet. So we'll help you create that application. We'll help you get the word out to the community. I'm sure you guys doing Instagram, TikTok, nowadays you got to TikTok to get anything out, right? So we'll help you with that. Or however you want to get the word out to make sure it's publicized for all the districts and that it's targeting the people that you wanted to target. And then once we get those responses back, we'll help you review them, make your funding determination, get those agreements signed, and cut those checks.
And what if they're already in this county system?
Yeah, that's
Or
what
we
it is.
already giving money to them. But they
You just want to continue to get
money.
money. Well, as long as the reason that you're giving them money now meets the ARPA requirements, and you just want to give them some more money with ARPA, then I'm a happy camper. You just give them
in
some
charge
more
of
money.
that monitoring.
Thank you.
No problem.
Commissioner Mason.
I think my question was answered. So,
All right. Anything else? I'm sorry, Commissioner Evans.
Thank you. So what are our next steps? What's our next deliverable here? Thank you.
So my job is to get you guys a task order for what we just discussed, what we're going to do, right? I'll give an estimate number of hours that it's going to take. Again, that's an estimate. And then I'll get you that so we can begin working, right? And we've got more work, and it sounds like you guys have got more work. So while we're doing our due diligence, you guys will do your due diligence, and again, we're here to help you. But that's, as it relates to me, that's my next step. Get that task order signed, look at the initiatives that you guys have already prioritized individually, look at the money that's already gone out the door. That's what my first task order is going to be. And then after that, we'll be focused on this money that's not been allocated yet, helping you all determine where you want to park that money, what the parameters are for that money, and how best to get it out to the community.
And, Mr. Sims, you have all the commissioners' lists, is that correct?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
We have the current list. I don't know if there's some changes because some commissioners were making some changes.
I'll send it to you.
So we need that, those lists.
I think the last change, Commissioner Henderson sent that out. You sent your list out.
Yes, but I think Commissioner Sanders here mentioned she was gonna provide some additional.
I got mine right there.
Okay.
But I wanna,
So if I can get all the commissioners just to make sure we all on the same page, can you please resubmit your list to Mr. Sims? Mr. Sims to make sure that Ms. Shannon will get that list. We can do it that way. That way we know everybody's list got turned in correctly. Go ahead.
And Mr. Sims, probably will help you is that, I think I sent you the Excel spreadsheet and let everybody have access to it.
yes.
Probably use that and it'll help you just.
Oh, that's perfect. But I wanted to make sure the categories from the commission is that are the categories still the same? That would be my thing, and we can bring that before the board next week.
The categories will probably remain the same, it's just probably the products that are under the categories. The categories are actually set by.
For the dollar amount, I should say, for the categories, because one of the lists was like COVID vaccination. Is that amount still relevant now? Do we still want to have a budget amount for that?
So what we can do, that can be a subject of discussion Tuesday.
Yes.
Tuesday night. We want to make sure we get everything the way we need it, so we can get everything sent to Ms. Shannon, and she can do what she needs to do the proper research, so she can get back to us, so there can be checks issued. So if we can do it that way, I think it'll make it a lot easier for everybody.
Absolutely.
We agree with everybody, so if you can, we'll talk about that Tuesday night to make sure that list had to change. Go ahead.
Can you provide, I don't know if you ever work with any other counties in regards to, ARPA allows a home repair for seniors. That's actually a category. We have some funds for that. And we were kind of on our bed here because we didn't know how that looked. So other counties have done it. So we have a lot of seniors that are reaching out to us because they see other counties actually doing that to provide that. So if you can let us know how to go about that.
So really, the use of ARPA funding, absolutely, I recommend it if you have that need for the seniors in your community. They can use it for things like getting their roof repaired, their furnaces, getting new windows, because we know a lot of the older community are frugal, they won't complain, and they'll just make do at their own detriment. And so we want to make sure that they're looked after as well. So absolutely, that is something that is ARPA allowable. We can help you with that.
Thank you.
Any more questions now? Thank you so much. We greatly appreciate you, and look like we're headed on the right track, so we greatly appreciate it. Anything else, guys? I seek a motion that we're adjourned.
Second.
It's a motion by Commissioner Henderson and second by Commissioner Mason. All in favor? We stand adjourned.